Thank you for joining us. We are recording live from Future Proof, which is just so much fun. And as we heard in the introduction, Inflection Points has been a lot of fun to record over the last year and a half that we've been doing it, because it's all about journeys, right? And inflection points along those journeys and what leads us to where we are today. And I've been excited to talk to a lot of guests, but maybe none so much as Toussaint. And I think everyone will hear as we go through the conversation today just what an amazing journey he's had to where he is today. Toussaint is the founder and CEO of a company called Uplifting Capital, which he'll talk a lot more about as we get through the conversation today. Recently named wealthmanagement.com's 10 to watch in 2023, so maybe we've all been here to see it.
You're watching me?
Keep watching. We'll see what he's got the rest of the year. But no, really excited. He's actually a SoCal native, so while lives with his family, 3 daughters under the age of 7, in Northern California in Marin, is a native of Southern California, so happy to be back here and a part of Future Proof. So Toussaint, thank you for joining me.
No, it's an honor, and thank you for having me. Thank you guys for joining us.
So let's start, like we were just talking about, let's start back to your time in Southern California, growing up. I like to start sort of with our more formidable years, and I know I personally was very shaped by my childhood and my father, my mother, and influences around me. So why don't you talk to us about what it was like growing up down here and sort of the influences you had?
Yeah, so I was born actually in Orange. My parents were both at, my dad was at UCI working on a PhD in economics, like first of his family to go to college, and my mom was there doing counseling, so like very much a Southern California native. My parents separated pretty early on when I was about 3, and I feel like my mom is really the strongest influence in my kind of craziness. Yeah. I think people here have a pretty jagged path. And so she definitely marched to the beat of her own drum, or marched to the beat of her own drum. And I think I got courage from that, drew inspiration from that for most of my life. And now I'm recognizing that in myself. Yeah. My kids will tell you they recognize that in me. But I would say just a huge part of my journey. So she was always teaching, always connecting spiritually with things, whether that had a spiritual connection or not. I remember being a kid and watching this movie, Friday, like comedy movie, Ice Cube,
such
Friday.
A great movie.
And she was like trying to teach us spiritual lessons about what was going on behind Friday. I'm like, Mom, you can't, you can't bring that into this.
Is there a spiritual lesson behind Puff Puff Give?
I couldn't find it, but if my mom was here today, she would likely find one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's just sort of the nature of my upbringing, and like before going outside to play, even in like junior high school, like she required us to meditate sometimes. Like she had this tape called Healing Waterfalls, and it like took you through all these different colors. Well, very hippy dippy. Like I'm appropriately in Marin County now, but
yeah, fair enough.
That was back when we were in LA. But that was just her. Like that was always her, and it sort of gives you the courage to be different when you have someone who has that courage from very early on. Yeah.
I love what you just said, that courage to be different, because as we get through and up to your journey today, right? I mean, you've exhibited a ton of courage as you've come through sort of this more recent part of your career journey. So Southern California, born and raised. Did you spend most of your time with your mom?
Yeah. I had a little stretch in there where I lived with my dad, but like the consistent place in my life was with my mom.
So when you went to St. Mary's, what was it that drove you north? And sort of, did you know what you wanted to do heading into college?
No, so I just wanted to get a job, honestly. Yeah. Like my mom had done social work most of my life, so she was doing homeless support services at a place called Project Home Again, and never really kind of settled in financially. So for me, the idea of having a stable job and kind of being settled financially was the most appealing thing. And so I thought, what job could I get that would like hire right out of college? Accounting. So I started out in accounting and ended up kind of transitioning into finance from there. But it was St. Mary's has a strong accounting program. I was encouraged to apply there by one of their admissions folks, and so I just kind of meandered my way to St. Mary's, and fortunately met my wife there and built a life around that. But yeah.
So St. Mary's, what then was the pivot to get into law school? Because you were in accounting, but then 2 years later, right after St. Mary's, you decide to go to UCLA and go to law school.
Yeah, I make things hard. So I had done I did a senior honors thesis on community development banks, and I studied, like, we went into a bank called Community Bank of the Bay in Oakland, and studied basically what the greatest management needs were. Like, you took this group of seniors and we built a consulting project around what the greatest management needs were, and like all this regulatory complexity was in my mind what the greatest hurdle was. Like, there was so much that I saw that they could unlock. They were under-resourced. And so for me, the need was legal, not financial, not economic. And so I saw that need, but I never had considered myself going to law school. I had a business ethics professor suggest that I go to law school, and I laughed in her office. It seemed so far-fetched to me.
Yeah.
But my wife was studying for the LSAT. She wanted to go to law school, and she thinks she can do anything. She's like, my now wife was studying for the LSAT, and I actually looked at the LSAT test and thought, like, I could do well on that. This is my jam. And so it was the LSAT test that gave me confidence that I could go to law school, which I did. I ended up teaching the LSAT, and like my grades weren't as good as my LSAT score, but the LSAT score pulled me into law school, and I knew I wanted to do community development, which I did when I got to law school.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you, as you think about your journey through college, I mean, that's even just in your university years, right? That's quite some winding road,
I have
right?
never thought about all that. This makes me feel even crazier because I've never thought about all of this at one time.
No, but it is like it's quite a run.
Yeah.
How did you, as you're thinking about these, you were young, right?
I was.
What was it about, whether it was your upbringing or just in you, that like gave you the confidence to your mom? Obviously, I just am repeating what she said to you, but to help you make those decisions, was there someone in your life that was helping drive some of that road?
Somewhat, but I'm a very deliberate, deliberate is probably not the right word. I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about decisions before I make them, but when I arrive at a truth that aligns internally, I'm not left with many questions about where I should go. So once I like feel that aligned truth, all my life, I really don't feel much choice in going in a particular direction.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like. Again, as we get into your sort of more recent journey, it sounds like that certainly has been the driving force too.
Yeah.
To sort of know and go. So UCLA Law School, that was in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I graduated law school 2006.
2006. You start as is it a fellow at LA City?
Yes, yeah. So I did a fellowship at the LA City Attorney's Office doing in their environmental law department. You do your homework.
I try. No stone unturned.
I make sure my email's closed and I'm afraid.
Oh, we're just getting started. No, so that was sort of the entree in.
That was my entree into. So I ended up going into law for cities. Yeah, so I did law for cities and government agencies. So that was the entree in. I loved that. I had no expectation of doing that going into law school. So I did. I wanted to do community development. I went in after my first year of law school and worked at an organization called LAFLA, LA Legal Aid Foundation, and I worked in their economic development unit. Basically working with affordable housing developers on different community development projects. Yeah. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. So it was transactional law. So you're going through these documents and you're basically looking for, in law, there's two skills that lawyers have: issue spotting and analysis. And like this whole idea of like finding an issue when one's not there, like just drove me crazy. So I'm like, I'm just going through these, and so I hated it. And so I went to the LA City Attorney's Office actually after my second year, just to do something different. And I did litigation, just any kind of litigation. I was a fellow and I just got randomly placed in litigation and I loved it. It was like concrete problems that I was solving, and so I ended up going and doing environmental litigation after law school, and then went on to a law firm that did similar work.
And that was not an insignificant period of your life. You were at the law firm for almost 12 years.
12 years, yeah. I was there for 12 years, and it was, I enjoyed it. I loved it. I loved learning. I loved being a lawyer, but by the end, I was just managing people, and I thought, if you're gonna be in a company managing people, like, no offense to any lawyers, but there are much better people and much better settings to manage people in than a law firm. And so toward the end of that journey, I had a conversation with my law colleagues, one of my partners, and by that time I'd gone from LA to open up a litigation practice in San Francisco. And I said, can I just grow something? Because I enjoyed working with clients. I'd enjoyed kind of growing the business of our law firm. And it was kind of like, if we do that for you, we got to do it for everybody. It was like, not really what law firms do. It's like, okay, That was
it.
That was,
well, let's think, because law firms, I feel like, I know a number of lawyers, and the idea of working at a law firm to me does feel a bit transactional. I don't know, it's just very billable by the hour.
You sell your time.
Right?
You're selling your time, yeah.
Did you find, though, that there were individuals there, because it's a long time to be somewhere, right, almost 12 years. Did you find yourself having inflection points, pun intended, right, kind of throughout those 12 years? And were there individuals that helped you? Absolutely.
No, I loved the people inside of that firm. Like, I learned to be a professional at the law firm. I had no idea how to manage time or track. So I learned to be a professional. Some brilliant lawyers I work with who are still friends to this day. So my first inflection point there was going from being an associate in the LA office to really kind of my path to partnership was like starting something in the San Francisco office. There was no real litigation presence in the San Francisco office of that firm when I got there. So it was like, could I go as a young-ish lawyer and build something and manage people? So that was a huge inflection point. And the managing partner of that office, his name is Greg Stepanicic, was like one of the most brilliant, kind, thoughtful leaders that I've ever come across. I still talk to him and consult him. And so I also learned like what leadership looked like just in his style, because it was very aligned with what I thought leadership should look like. There's a lot of humility to it, and a lot of grace to it. So huge inflection points there.
Absolutely. So one of the most impactful, I think, relevant for this audience in particular is, as we heard in the intro, like, how do you get into wealth management, right? And so I think when you hear about the journey so far, Southern California kid, law school, environmental law, but now you run Uplifting Capital and you were at an RIA, like, that's a pretty meaningful shift. How did you make that transition, and what were sort of the driving forces behind leaving what you had done your entire career as a lawyer to really found an RIA?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I had this, I was on a hike with Greg, and I said, like, I had this burning feeling that I wanted to grow something. And in litigation, it's a lot about tearing down.
By the way, that was a very California thing to say. I was on a hike.
I was in Marin County. I was on a hike in Marin. We were on a trail in Marin County. If I didn't know you were from Marin, I would know you were from Marin. I was wearing Tivas and socks.
After that comment. No in Chicago, we don't have conversations while we hike.
So we were on a hike, and I was just telling him, like, I want to move toward expanding stuff. Like, right now, I feel like my job is about like being in these problems. I've flipped this phrase. So that was the start of the awareness of that was the start of that. I continued the meditation journey that my mom started. So I went to this retreat with an organization called Search Inside Yourself. It's like a very science-based kind of business. It's couched in business terms. When I went, I didn't realize it was a mindfulness-based kind of emotional intelligence leadership conference. But it was the first time I'd taken 2 days away from law, and got some quiet space. And so we were there, and I was going there to build these soft skills, because they called it emotional intelligence. What I got was enough quiet to realize I had a lot of background dissatisfaction. And I had been working with my brother-in-law. He'd left Ed Jones and started his own kind of hang-a-shingle Dakota Wealth Management. And he was getting approached by different independent RIAs within the community where he lived in Petaluma in Northern California. So there are a couple guys from independent RIAs, a couple guys from Ed Jones, or a man and woman from Ed Jones had approached him and just said, like, we should come together and do something. And at that point, I was, I think, 3 years into partnership, and I had all of these ideas about how I thought equity should be shared and how you could kind of really incentivize young, growing professionals. So people who are kind of in these growth or established phase of their careers where they're naturally just attracting business but not ready to sell their businesses. So I was like, this is you guys. And if I was you, like, here's how I design the incentives. Here's how I would kind of structure equity. Here's what the culture needs to be around that. And I ended up writing this 15-page business plan for the company to be. We called it the manifesto. And I started. I talked to the whole group at some point, and they wanted me to come in and like do that, like advise them on that part time, like some litigation guy advised them on that part time. So I gave up my partnership, and it was supposed to be a quarter time that I was doing that advice, and I was staying on the law firm of counsel. But I was so inspired to work there. It was a great group of people. So I think 3 months in, I became CEO of what that ultimate firm would be, and we grew, as you know, over the next few years. We grew
$2 billion.
Yep, we grew pretty substantially, and more recently sold that. Yeah,
absolutely. What was the catalyst, do you think, of that growth? Because that, I mean, I think a lot of people out here think, wow, $2 billion, that's a significantly sized firm. What do you think the catalysts were to the growth that you experienced at Enzo?
We knew what the culture had to. Everyone who started embodied the culture, and then we knew what those cultural elements had to be in each advisor that we brought on every time. So we grew a substantial amount by inorganic growth, a substantial amount by organic growth, and for us, like the experience of the advisors and clients who were joining the firm was our best recruiting and revenue driving tool. So we would have when advisors came on, they were in this middle phase of their careers. I talk about the fact that this industry really has two things packaged as one. Mm-hmm. They have the practice that an advisor really owns, like, because that advisor could pick up that asset and take it with them, even if they're a W-2. They can always pick it up. And then there's an enterprise that goes over the top of that, where the firm basically supplies something to an advisor as customer. Most places don't disaggregate that. We disaggregated that, and what we said was, advisors will own 100% of their practices, and we will collectively own the enterprise, and we'll share the ownership of that enterprise based on contributions to growth and management. And we'll reevaluate that on a quarterly basis. And so what that ended up attracting is people who saw their practices as appreciating assets. So those were like G2 advisors who were growing and who were ready to kind of see their growth as an asset of their own. Some of them were capturing those assets from captive environments. Some of those were just coming over and seeing those as more valuable where we were. So there was those advisors, and there was also people who wanted to contribute to building an enterprise. They were like these entrepreneurial growers and builders, and so we hired for that. There had to be an abundant mindset in everybody, because there was people who could go out and do this on their own who were choosing to do that with us, and so we did that. And then there was it was as weird as I was, right? We talked about fulfillment a lot, and we built client experience around what we truly thought fulfillment was. And to me, a corollary of providing fulfillment to clients, which is really what all clients are getting at. They come for the money, but they're actually seeking fulfillment. You had to build a fulfilling wealth management experience for advisors, right? They had to give from a well that actually had water.
I love that so much. I'm just thinking about you as the CEO, coming from a law background into a business you've never worked in. What was that experience like? Did you have moments of imposter? I mean, I don't want to put on you, but like, I know I've suffered from imposter syndrome quite frequently. Like, was there some moments of that, and how did you manage through that?
Yeah, there was a ton of imposter syndrome, especially early on. But I think, one of those, I think the primary driver of fulfillment, and also the primary driver of meaningful work, is loving and trusting relationships. Mm-hmm. And so the trust of all of those advisors who had been in 20 years, they trusted me, this new guy, and they had 20-year careers. They had, hundreds of millions of dollars that they were managing individually, some of them. So I think I leaned a lot on them saying, what your leadership is valuable, what you're doing is not only appropriate but additive to us in the industry. And so I had to kind of turn back inward to our team quite a bit, just to trust that I was going in the right direction.
Well, that's the sign, I think, of a good leader too, right? Acknowledging what you don't know and looking to those that have it. So 2020, I think anytime any of us say 2020, we all have a reaction. We all think about what that time was. It's hard to believe. I know we say it all the time, but that it was in March of 2020 is 3.5 years ago now, and how much has changed. All the time feels like it's frozen oftentimes. We all had our own experiences. We all had our own personal reactions to that time, whether it be COVID or the social injustices that we saw. You were particularly impacted during that period of time, and that served as a major inflection point for you.
It did.
Do you want to take us through that part of your journey and talk about some of the work you were doing then?
Yeah. So I'll go back one step, because we talked about my mom.
Yeah.
So 2017, late 2017, actually November 2017 is where that journey started. That was a gnarly point in time for our family. So I lost my mom in early November 2017, November 5th, 2017. We had our twins, so kids 2 and 3, on November 10th of 2017.
Oh my God.
We lost my wife's dad on November 21st of 2017.
Stop.
And then I transitioned into Enzo full time. I took over that CEO role 2018, at the top of 2018. And so I did not slow down to grieve the loss of my mom. I couldn't. I had kids to take care of. I had this business and all this stuff. I think going into 2020 was the first time that I started to just go oh, I have some stuff I haven't dealt
unpack.
with. And so I was thinking about grief, and I was reading about grief going into 2020. And so I think I had this readiness, and I had this emotional openness that I hadn't had in a long time. Actually, I struggled for a long time to get back in touch with my emotional journey. And so 2020, I was starting to have the courage to tiptoe into that. And so between the pandemic and it being quiet enough for us to feel and losing a lot of distraction, and then all these killings that happened of Black men and women, all the tragedy around the pandemic itself, all of that cut through. All of that broke through. And so shortly after George Floyd was killed, I was just I was in my office actually in tears. I was crying. Actually, I had to leave work and went home and tried to figure out what I was going to say to our team. So we did all hands meetings every Tuesday. I think that was late the prior week. And so I was trying to think about what I was going to say to our team, because we did these one-word check-ins. And I got
one-word check-ins?
We did one-word check-ins. So anything about one word, one sentence, whatever. That's how we opened our partners meetings. And then we did all hands meetings once a month. And so that once a month was all hands meetings. So we did one word, just whatever it is that you're feeling, whatever it is that you're bringing, whatever it can be your feelings, it doesn't have to be. Okay. And then one sentence. And I could feel everyone on the phone waiting for me to check in first. And it was one of the few times in my life where I did not want to lead, right? I did not want to go first. And so I remember just pushing out the word distracted. That was the one word that I could say. And I planned not to do one sentence. It was one word, distracted. And then through a very, very shaky voice, I started to explain what I was distracted by. And it was this powerful experience. I'm getting chills right now talking to you. It was this powerful experience of realizing that even though I was an only in that firm, I was the only Black person in that firm, so I was assuming that this was an individual experience. I'm gonna open up this. Everybody on the phone was feeling some sense of what I was feeling. Obviously there's a different depth and all that stuff, but everybody was feeling some sense of what I was feeling. And so we ended up just really unpacking a powerful conversation about my experience and that how that was impacted in wealth management and all these different things. And I ended up taking that home with me and had a colleague call me afterwards crying about wishing he had done more, because he was saying, oh, they did a protest in my town over the weekend, and I didn't go. Like, I have a family, and like, I just didn't feel comfortable taking my daughter out there, and there was all this shame around the fact that he didn't go, and I just realized, like, it's so shame-ridden trying to endeavor into impacting any of these hot button issues that we have. And so I was talking to him. I'm like, Drew, like, we talked about 1% changes at Enzo. So I was like, Drew, that's not your 1%, right? That's not the 1% change that you need to make on this issue. Like, you actually picked up the phone to call me and have a conversation. So my suggestion to him was, I was telling him the power of that listening that they did at our all hands meeting. So my suggestion was, just about everybody has a friend of a different culture. Why don't you call them and ask them about like what their experience is with race or racism? Ask them about some bias they experience in the workplace, and then ask them about just their humanity. Like how does that show up for them? And he was like, well, you're that one friend for me. I'm like, dang, I was again not a situation where I was seeing myself as like doing it. And so we ended up having a really rich conversation, and he encouraged me to have that conversation more publicly, which I did. And so I ended up leading a bunch of those conversations. I had one of those conversations with Sam Ushio, who I just saw here somewhere. Oh, there's Sam over there. Like that conversation expanded, and it became this really important part of my journey that took over my journey. So I ended up taking a sabbatical from Enzo for a few months just to lead those conversations and lead talks around that evolved from just talking about bias to talking about impact generally and unpacking why I thought I was able to go into impact in this very emotionally healthy and now my pun's intended, in this uplifting way. Yeah. Like the surprising part of what I was doing, like talking about, nobody wants to talk about race or racism. Nobody. Including me. Yeah. Like I'd spent my whole professional career like head down, like not wanting to talk about that. And it was uplifting to talk about. And it felt good. I was more empowered. I was a better version of myself coming out of that. And so I was thoughtful about why that was and what the ingredients were. And I started to share that with not only our firm, but some different companies and some different organizations.
It's incredibly powerful. I think race and racism, to your point, no one wants to talk about it, but the minute that you start to, and I feel like you help take that tension out of the room, and just the walls are down, have the conversation, have a free space to have that. We were all being impacted by it. Yeah,
we brought in, so when I recorded them, we brought in speaking coaches and listening coaches. So these therapists on both sides of the conversation to talk about, okay, here's the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? And here's how you give someone sort of audience without inserting your own shame into it. Yeah. Here's how you deal with any trauma that comes up. Like, so it was important to also have that as part of those conversations. But those changed me. That process.
The difference between sympathy and empathy. I was listening to the Glennon Doyle podcast, We Can Do Hard Things, and she actually had an interesting conversation about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and how empathy comes back out through your hands, where you're actually going to then do something, which I thought was actually a really interesting sort of differentiation between those two words. And I feel like that's what you did, right? With uplifting, it came back out through your hands, and you actually did something about it.
Yeah, Brene Brown has this great little anecdote.
One of my favorites.
Oh yeah, I love me some Brene. She has a great little anecdote where she talks about a friend who's going through a hard time down in a cave, and sympathy is like shouting down and going, "Are you okay down there?" Oh, and like empathy is actually like climbing down and sitting with, right?
Exactly. I'm going to get you out. No, I think that's right. I mean, she has a lot of conversations about shame too.
She does. What she has been really formative in my thinking around shame too.
Absolutely.
And vulnerability.
That rings for me. That rings very true for me. And I think when let's pivot to uplifting, because I think I want to understand. Clearly, you were having such a massive impact on the wealth management industry, right? What you were doing there and the talks that you were leading, and what were you doing to open up this conversation? Because think about it, if you own a business, you're a CEO at that period of time, everybody wanted to talk about this, and how many people were afraid to have the conversation. Yeah. So for you to have that kind of impact is incredible. What was it then? What was the inflection point? What was the pivot that said, all right, it's time for uplifting? And I know we have friends in common that sort of helped influence that journey, but what was it there?
Yeah, I had to live in this space full time. So at some point you have to get back to your day job. And I was moonlighting at something that I just felt was a calling. And so to me, this idea of helping people, first of all, going through the experience with what became, we called it the Just Listen Project. Going through that experience with what became those talks and all of that helped me realize, like, it's not just me. And I think we spend a lot of times thinking about what we go through or what we're feeling as just us. And I think I got courage. There was like, I did this initial post before I did those conversations. There was like 20,000 people who responded to those posts, and like it was crazy. And so I realized, like, there are more people who are grieving something than just me, and there's more people who need this than just me. And from my station as a leader of this wealth management firm, I think I knew the advisors were dealing with this, and my hunch was that clients were. And if our aspiration was to help people to fulfillment, I thought I unlocked a lot of my own fulfillment and went down my journey by really engaging with the issues that I cared about most. And so what if this essential ingredient to fulfillment could be unlocked for advisors and clients who were the audience who was most kind of engaged with what I was doing at that point. And so I started to think about what might be designed to do that, how I could do that in a way that aligned with me. I'm a capitalist. Like, I believe in the power of markets. I believe in the power of markets to create change. And so, like, was there something in that aligned with me that created the kind of change and also empowered people to do this in a way that I thought was true to was personal. So without imposing what I thought were the most important things in the world on people, was there a way that I could sort of be an agent for that? And so that's that nugget is what grew into Uplifting Capital. Yeah.
And how do our friends at Ethic, you have some people along the way that have helped encourage you and sort of push through? Absolutely.
So Ethic, I thought, was the closest thing to what we were doing in the public markets. And so I met Alex and Doug and Jay very early on in the Ethic journey. And to me, like, based on what we were doing at Enzo. So Ethic is a values-aligned public markets investing firm. So they do direct indexing, but they do a really good job of helping people feel the impact or translating the impact of investments to the investor. And they've been successful in doing that. And so when I started I went in also did a talk inside of Ethic about impact. Like, very early on in this, I talked to them about race and racism and impact and all those things. And it was a powerful conversation. And when I came to them and said, like, I really think this should be done in the private markets. And so that's what Uplifting Capital became. I thought, there are so many cool companies, whether that's companies going at climate change, whether that's companies trying to do things to solve affordable housing, whether that's companies doing things to solve these social issues. Like, there's all these amazing things being done. A lot of that's at the pension, endowment, large foundation level, non-concessionary things. But this should exist in wealth management, specifically because this way of investing, when done right, has so much to do with fulfillment. And this was at a time when people are like moving in mass into alternatives, right? And so I thought, if this stampede into alternatives happens and people don't realize that there's a way to do this impactfully that aligns with portfolios, and that would be a shame. And so that started the process of me building Uplifting Capital.
And talk about where you are today with Uplifting.
Yeah, so we at the end of 2020, I really started building in the background, right? And so was still CEO, and my partners knew that this was something that was needling at me. 21, I tried to leave Enzo. They kept me around but I stepped into a chairman role. Okay. So I went as non-executive chairman and spent most of 21 just building Uplifting. We raised some money at the end of 21 at the company level and launched in 22 with our first kind of vehicle to help people do something akin to direct investing in the private market. So values-aligned private market investing. So we do that annually. And so we'll close our first vehicle this month, where we thought, and we've started this model of building partnerships with multifamily offices and wealth management firms. So not only are we closing this first one, we have kind of doubled the number of commitments into our next two vehicles. So they're kind of pre-committed into our next two vehicles. And so I'm super grateful, encouraged. Our team is incredible. We had a board member, Linda Asante. She was an investor in our seed, our kind of pre-seed angel round, whatever it was. And then she came on as our only independent board member. I roped her into being our investment committee chair. She had retired in 2020 from a big multifamily office called Jasper Ridge. So she retired. I roped her into being investment committee chair, and then I kept reeling her in. And so she's come on as our CIO.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
She is the most brilliant and kindest, but most brilliant multi-asset investor that I've ever met. So I'm overwhelmed with gratitude by just what has become of where we are. And so we'll go out and do it again. And I realized we were probably not ambitious enough with our first vehicle, so we'll do it much bigger next year and have fun and hopefully kind of let more people know that this option's available.
Yeah. Do you ever stop for a second and think about this journey? I mean, if you think about, you were a lawyer, and now you're talking about something that is so you just took a total left turn for all the good reasons, sort of following your gut, having that courage. Do you ever take a second and sort of think about that?
Probably not often enough, because it doesn't, I know, on paper, I guess it seems very jagged, but for me, it's been it feels like a very integrated journey.
Oh, when you tell the story, it makes total sense.
Yeah,
it's
it feels very integrated. So I haven't stopped as often as I should, and I spend most of my time in the future, as you could probably gather. But I will say, I slow down enough to feel overwhelming gratitude with because I'm sitting on stage by myself, I have done, I've done this, right? But there are so many people who have believed so much. Sam, for instance, so many people who have believed so deeply, and I've lived on their belief for a good stretch of this journey. I had no idea whether this was going to work from the beginning of 21 all the way through 22, halfway through 22, really, but all the way through 21, halfway through 22. We had a tiny little amount of our goal into our fund, and I was convincing myself that this was going to work, but I was really relying on the belief of a lot of other people. And so when I reflect, it just sends me to a place of tremendous gratitude, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's incredible what you've done. I think, as you think about this journey that you've had, do you yourself personally have a board of directors that you go to for advice and thoughts? I know I personally I have my personal board of directors that I use when I'm thinking about major decisions in my life. Have you found a set of individuals? I know you mentioned Greg, but additional people that have helped you along the way? Yeah,
my biggest board member, it's a large collection of individuals that I get little bites from. I'll keep shouting out Sam here since he's here, but Jordan Moss is a name that really comes to mind. So he's the founder of an affordable housing group, or essential housing group called Catalyst Housing, and he collected a huge syndicate of our initial investors. But he's as crazy as me, and so he has this affordable housing thing, and then he has a whole innovation lab, and then a whole impact lab that he calls it, where he's investing a ton of money into different impactful organizations, a ton of money into different prop tech organizations. I think he has a multi-billion-dollar firm after making a dramatic shift in what he's done. He's been super impactful. He introduced me to Linda, who is our CIO, who has a tremendous impact on, for whatever reason, everyone in our company except for me is a woman. And I think the council of women, maybe because of my mom being my most influential counsel growing up, and my mom and my sister are the two members of my house, I really enjoy the council of women. So my biggest board member is my wife. We talk about everything. She is a tremendous executive. She is the chief of staff at our firm. I don't even know what that means, because she does so many things.
She does it all.
She does it all. She as Linda says, she gets stuff, not stuff, but she gets stuff done. And so she's incredible. So she's probably my biggest sort of influence in soundboard. And then there's too many others to name. The guys at Ethic are some of them, and others. Yeah.
Well, before we turn it over, I do want to open it up to any questions in the audience just for the last couple of minutes. But you do a lot of board work. I know you said you're doing a moratorium on it, but I think
I have an imposed moratorium.
An imposed moratorium. I know there's probably a lot of people in the audience. I know I personally do some board work. Like, how did that start to happen for you? For those that might be interested in how they might want to think about getting into boards themselves.
Yeah. So if you look at the boards that I participate in, it's a real reflection of everything I've talked about.
Sure.
So for me, it started as organizations that are very aligned, and usually I've gotten to know the organizations first. So one of them is that Google spin out mindfulness organization, Search Inside Yourself. I went in as a student, and then I went in to be a teacher, and then I realized they wanted you to be like these full-time meditation teachers. So I'm a dropout of their teaching program, and then somehow I joined their board in 2020. Another one is there's a criminal justice reform organization that talks a lot about healing. So as much as they talk about how parole and probation should be reformed, they talk about how we need to give life back to communities, which is a very aligned way of thinking about that issue to me. And so Alliance for Safety and Justice is that organization. Another mental health organization, and then of course my alumni board of regents is.
So follow your passions.
Yeah, I just follow. I've followed my passions, and I've looked for, like, I actually have to think I can add value.
Right.
The reason for the moratorium is I'd just be a pretty crummy board member on anything else I added. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, Raphael House too. I should shout out.
Oh yeah, I saw that one too.
Shelter.
We have a couple of minutes. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for? I literally never take questions on my podcast, but if anybody has any, we're happy to take them. Awesome. All right. Toussaint, I know you say that you are overwhelmed with gratitude. I would say that well-deserved. I mean, you just exude what you do and what you believe and the impact you've had on other people. So I'm not at all shocked that has been returned back to you. I hope everybody has been as impacted as I have been getting to know Toussaint. And the last thing I like to ask people before where they can find you is I have a 2.5-year-old, so I don't have a lot of time to read, but I have a lot of time to listen when I run. Are there any podcasts that you find? We talked about Brene. I talked about Glennon.
Yeah.
Are there any other podcasts that you find yourself interested in right now that you listen to?
I'll shout out my own podcast. I'm not going to shout out myself. So Uplifting Conversations, where we talk about impact journeys. So that's one. I listen to a lot of books on tape. So I'm re-listening to, I would recommend to anybody, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, because I'm like thinking about how to add meaning. But the one that I'll recommend this book to anybody who's going through anything, not just grief. The one that really impacted me that I was listening to at the time that I started this was a book called Finding Meaning by David Kessler. He's one of the authors of the 5 Stages of Grief, and I won't go through the whole book, but he went through this journey of losing his own son, and he realized that 5th and final stage of acceptance was really not enough for him. Like, he couldn't get to that, and so he found this 6th stage of meaning, and he talks about how, like, there's all this healing that happens that's available in finding meaning in all of these crises, and that's really informed a lot of what we do. So I would recommend that. But there's a bunch of
that's awesome. No, that's a really great one. Well, you certainly have showed the courage to be different that your mom encouraged you to do. This has been just a total pleasure. Where can people find you, find information about Uplifting?
Mostly on, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I don't really do many other social media platforms all that well. And then, upliftingcapital.com, or, I think those are probably the 2 places where you can find the best.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Flex Networks, I hope that everybody becomes a member. We are a community for asset managers, wealth managers, and financial professionals. Would love for all of you to become a member for free. We can visit our tents. You can access this podcast and much more within the Flex Networks platform, podcasts, videos, intelligence, et cetera. So certainly would really appreciate that as well. It has been a pleasure to be with all of you, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.